détente we used to call it, the Soviet bureaucracy finds it more difficult to justify open repression. And as a result, there is a dialogue, private and cautious certainly, but a dialogue on matters of war and peace, and in a country ever mindful that 22 million of its people died in the last war. Eventually this dialogue finds an echo in the Soviet leadership, burdened by military spending and unable to feed its own people without imported American grain. When tension is relaxed, these reformist elements have influence, and the result has been a partial test ban treaty and strategic arms limitations. But when the West rattles its missiles, there is no dialogue and no echoes, only a state of siege, only danger. In the 1950s, at the height of the old Cold War, John Foster Dulles, then American Secretary of State, said, "In order to make people bear the burden, we have to create an emotional atmosphere akin to a wartime psychology. We must create the idea of a threat from without. The manipulation of statistics, sometimes known as disinformation, is one way of creating this wartime psychology."
If you read a statement by the American Secretary of Defense about the number of Soviet divisions in Eastern Europe, you'd probably take that as a hard fact. And if you read a statement actually issued in the same month by the chairman of the American Joint Chiefs of Staff about the number of Soviet divisions in Eastern Europe, you'd probably take that as a hard fact. And when you found out the Secretary of Defense said there were 31 Soviet divisions there, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said there were 27, which was what they said in 1978, then you start by realizing there are no agreed facts.
Can you develop that from those diagrams with the tanks lined up against each other? Now, what's been left out of those?
The age of the tanks, for example. Some of the Warsaw Pact tanks are nearly 30 years old, much older than NATO tanks.
So they're not as efficient?
They're not as efficient, they break down more easily, they don't have as powerful guns, their guns aren't as accurate, they can't fire on the move, and all other kinds of questions like that. Anti-tank weapons are left out. NATO has got about 250,000 anti-tank guided weapons, and it's got numerous other weapon systems which are capable of destroying tanks with quite extraordinary and really rather nasty efficiency. And so if you see this comparison of tanks, I suppose the first question to say is, are these facts? For example, if you compare the number of tanks, that in a sense is a half-truth, because you must throw in the number of anti-tank weapons when you're making that kind of comparison. From half-truths one moves on to distortions, and from distortions one goes on to downright lies.
In